What's going on, guys? This is Andre here with the Kevin Breeze channel, and this is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A52. The Samsung Galaxy A52 is the direct successor of the Samsung Galaxy A51. Today, I'm going to be going over the best and worst things about this phone. Now, I do want to point out that this is the international variant of the phone. That being said, let's get started. Now, the first pro of this phone is that it has a lot of storage. This phone is getting 128 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so that really is a lot of space. These days, apps and files in general are just getting larger and larger. Even the system does take up a pretty good chunk of space, so it's really important to have more storage than you think you need, because it's always better to have it and not need it than the other way around. And with 128 gigabytes of internal storage, that's really a lot. You're going to be able to do pretty much anything. And if you have a lot of photos and videos, you can always put that on a microSD card and increase the storage for that even more. To give you an idea of what this looks like, right now 30.7 gigabytes of storage is being used, and that's only taking up 23% of the space. Now, a lot of phones in this price range only have 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and if it only had 64 gigabytes of internal storage, then almost half of the storage available would be taken up already. And taking a look at the system, that's no small chunk of space. This is really a lot, 21.55 gigabytes. Just for the bare minimum. You can't get out of having this space taken up. So it's really important to have as much extra space as you can possibly get these days, just because everything is getting so much larger. Now, my next pro for this phone is the processor. This phone is getting 6 gigabytes of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 720G processor. Now, this is definitely an upgrade from the Samsung Galaxy A51, its predecessor, that only had 4 gigabytes of RAM. That extra 2 gigabytes of RAM is really going to help you with activities and apps that are more taxing on the processor, so you'll be able to do more and faster as well. We ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on the phone, and it came back with a single core score of 538 and a multi-core score of 1559. Now, that's actually a bit of an improvement in processing power from the Samsung Galaxy A51 as well, that had a single core score in the 300s and a multi-core score in the 1200s, so definitely an upgrade all around. To put this into perspective, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8, which was at the time it was released, one of the fastest smartphones on the market, has a multi-core score itself in the 1500s, and this phone has around the same processing power. So granted, the Samsung Galaxy Note 8 is pretty old as far as phones go. This phone still has the processing power of an older flagship phone, and it's really just a mid-level phone that's a lot less expensive than a flagship phone. So that just goes to show the performance is definitely there. This is not a weak processor by any means, and in most cases, it's going to be able to do pretty much anything you need it to do. My next pro for this phone is that it has a really good display. This phone has a 6.5-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 407, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen-to-body ratio of 84.6%. So this display is definitely really high quality. The 1080p resolution is especially nice, considering that a lot of mid-level phones around this range, like the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G for example, only have resolutions of 720p, and that's not uncommon either for a mid-level phone to only have a 720p resolution. So it is really nice that this phone does have a 1080p resolution instead. Not only that, but the Super AMOLED display means the colors are going to be a lot brighter than something like an LCD or a TFT display. And in addition to that, this phone is unique in the sense that it has a 90Hz display instead of a 60Hz display. And what that means is basically movements on the screen are going to be smoother and faster. So for example, scrolling is going to be a lot nicer. If you're doing content consumption or high performance gaming, then it's definitely going to have an effect on the performance, and you're really going to see a difference on this. With a 90Hz display, you're definitely going to enjoy content consumption a lot more. Not only that, but I think this phone is pretty much the perfect size. It's not too big and also not too small. So you're not only going to get the benefits of having a big screen for stuff like content consumption and reading and photo and video editing and that sort of stuff, but you'll also get the portability of having a smaller screen so you can comfortably carry it around without worrying about it getting in the way of anything. My next pro for this phone is that it has dust and water resistance. This phone has water resistance up to a meter for 30 minutes, which is actually really impressive for a mid-level phone because in the past, most mid-level phones don't have this kind of thing. That's a feature that not even the higher end phones that aren't flagship phones really have. Usually flagship phones are the only phones that actually have dust and water resistance, which has always been unfortunate because phones like this that are still really nice and have great features, but maybe aren't quite flagship level, still should have that kind of protection because being a little less expensive doesn't mean that someone would want to protect it any less. So it's really nice to see that finally we have a mid-level phone that actually has dust and water resistance. Now my last pro for this phone is the cameras. This phone has a hole punch for the front-facing camera that's 32 megapixels. Not only is it really nice looking, but it also takes some really good quality pictures. This is a picture taken with the front-facing camera of the phone, and it does look really good. The details are really sharp, the colors are well balanced, it's overall really vivid, and not only is the picture really high quality, but it also has this extra little vibe to it, where the shadows and certain accents in the color are a lot more bold and powerful than just a normal high quality photo. It kind of reminds me of the photos taken by the iPhone 12, which does really have that more dramatic cinematic quality to them. And this camera really does have that sort of feel to it. So it is really impressive seeing that the Samsung Galaxy A51, the predecessor to this phone, does have a really great camera in itself. Samsung did take it a step further with the A52. Now on the back here, we have a pretty good variety of features as well, with the 64 megapixel rear camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. Now, I'm not a huge fan of macro cameras, but the fact that it's there alongside the ultra wide camera really shows that Samsung decided to put pretty much every standard feature in this phone's camera, and that's really good to see. I've seen manufacturers do the opposite with their mid-level phones. For example, the Motorola Moto G Power 2020 had an ultra wide camera that I thought was really nice, but Motorola actually took away the ultra-wide camera for the Moto G Power 2021, and I thought that was a bit odd because taking away a popular, really good feature from a phone's camera doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but I'm glad that Samsung didn't do this with the A52. If anything, these features are actually better than they were before. This is a picture taken with the phone's rear camera, and as you can see, just like the front-facing camera, the colors and details are so vivid and really high quality. I've seen on several occasions people use mobile phones for actual photography. This is usually in something like an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy Note 20, basically just the top of the line flagship phones. But honestly, I could see using a phone like the Samsung Galaxy A52 for photography as well, because these pictures are really just great. I don't see anything bad about this picture at all. Really, it just comes down to effects and that sort of thing. And in that case, you can just put it on any kind of photo editing app and it'll be good to go. So overall, whether you're into photography or maybe you do content creation or have some other professional need for a high quality camera on your phone, the Samsung Galaxy A52 is definitely going to be a good option because this camera is really great. But on the other hand, speaking of the camera and its features, that brings me to my first con about this phone, and that's the macro camera. Even though the macro camera can be cool from time to time, I feel like it's a little useless and sort of a waste of space on this phone because this phone is really starting to feel like a higher end phone, and I think that instead of a macro camera, they should have put a telephoto lens on this phone instead. The reason being because a macro camera really has only one purpose, and that's one that's really not used very often unless you're really into photography. All you can do with a macro camera is take super close-up pictures, and I don't really hear about people using something like that for everyday purposes, whereas with a telephoto lens, you can zoom in super far and still get that high quality. Not only can you do that, but you can also zoom in on an object and get the exact same effect as a macro camera, but it's easier since you don't have to press the lens up against something. I just think a telephoto lens would be a lot more useful, and it would definitely be a first. I've never seen a telephoto lens personally put into a phone that's a mid-level phone like the A52. so that would be a really impressive step in the right direction. My next con for this phone is the materials. Even though the design is really nice looking, it is just made of plastic. The back here is plastic, which it looks nice and feels pretty decent, but it's really not very premium. The screen is also plastic as well as the edges here, and I think it would have been nice if they put a little bit of metal or glass or a better material in the back, something to make this phone feel more premium and more high-end. My next con for this phone is that it has no wireless charging. That is a disappointment because given the other features that this phone has, like dust and water resistance, it would have been nice for it to have wireless charging as well. Wireless charging is a feature that's super useful, not just for high-end flagship phones, but also for these mid-level phones too. And so far, I've only seen a couple mid-level phones with wireless charging, so it would be nice to add that on to future mid-level phones as well. Because say your charging port breaks, then the phone is pretty much done for because nobody's going to spend that type of money to repair a mid-level phone when you can just buy a new one. But that's still an unfortunate waste of money. Whereas if a phone has wireless charging, then you can charge it wirelessly without plugging it in, so you can make it last a little bit longer without having to get a new one. Now, if this was a flagship phone, then that point would probably not be very valid because no one's going to want to use a flagship phone that doesn't have 100% functionality under normal circumstances. But with a mid-level phone where repairing it is really not that much of an option, but buying a new one of the exact same model is a little bit more expensive than you might want, having the option of using a wireless charger to make the phone last a little bit longer would be really nice. That's not the only situation where wireless charging is useful. Some people just prefer it. So it would be really nice to see a phone like this actually have wireless charging capabilities. Now, my next con for this phone is that it feels thicker than the Samsung Galaxy A51. These days, phones are getting slimmer and slimmer, and having this phone thicker than its predecessor without having better quality materials makes it feel just a little bit cheaper and a little bit less desirable. I would prefer to see it a little bit slimmer than the Samsung Galaxy A51 if anything. I think the A51 was the perfect size and shape. Making this phone thicker was a little unnecessary. Now, my last con for this phone is the fingerprint sensor. There's nothing really wrong with the fingerprint sensor. It still does feel good. In fact, it's basically the same fingerprint scanner as the A51. But since this phone has been upgraded in so many different ways already, it would have been nice to see them go the extra mile and give it the same fingerprint scanner as the Samsung Galaxy S21. Because while this fingerprint scanner is still decent, the Samsung Galaxy S21 did feel significantly better. It really had that flagship feel, and I think it would have been nice if they added that to this phone as well. But this is pros and cons for the Samsung Galaxy A52. To get more information about the device itself, definitely be sure to check out the review of the phone on the channel. And again, keep in mind that this is the international variant of the phone. For more info on pricing and availability, don't forget to check the link in the description because that information is always changing. But I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, definitely leave a thumbs up and subscribe. And I will see you in the next video.